So we're going to come straight in, Ash, if you wouldn't mind, and give us a little bit of background about you, and where you are now, and then we'll perhaps dig into the origin story from there.
Of course. So I'm Ash. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at a company called Volunteero. What we do is we are essentially an all-encompassing volunteer ecosystem. So we started out really by offering a volunteer management platform to organisations like charities, local government, healthcare, big events, things like that. Volunteers play a big part in sort of all these social services and things like that. So we basically aim to sort of save them time, improve their volunteer engagement, productivity, retention, all of that kind of stuff, all within a digital ecosystem. And our plan is to build out something a lot bigger than that, which just incorporates everything that volunteering entails into one space.
Awesome stuff. So that's a quick where we are now. Where did it start? What's your background? Can you tell us a bit about your early career as it was?
Yeah, please don't judge me for this, guys, but I was in investment banking for about 7 years. Boo hiss sort of stuff, isn't there? And look, in all honesty, why did I want to go into that? To be honest with you, I think I wanted to wear a tie, have 4 screens and shout swear words across a room, to be honest with you, and not much more than that. I don't think I knew anything about what I was getting myself into. I just kind of didn't know what to do, which I'm sure a lot of people started out, in university and stuff like that, not really knowing where life was going to take them. So I went down that route because it seemed like a sort of, credible career path with good prospects and stuff. So I worked for about 7 years at one of the banks sort of down the road, Goldman Sachs, and then spent some time at a hedge fund after that. So, I mean, in terms of as an origin story, I didn't really think of myself as being an entrepreneur until quite recently, actually. So when I left Goldman, I decided to go to a hedge fund just because I've always been quite a risk taker. And I felt if I went into something smaller, like a little startup hedge fund, I could be in there early doors, and if it became something big, then great. That would kind of propel my career forward, so to speak. But it kind of sapped the life out of me, to be totally honest with you. It was a lot worse than my banking days, which I thought couldn't really be the case. I was doing sort of 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. sort of days, working through weekends and stuff like that. And I think it just really sapped the energy out of me by the end of it. But what had kind of happened during that process was also quite critical to what led me to become a founder. Is I had the opportunity to essentially go and meet companies that were coming to IPO, which is basically where a company goes public on the market and they do a roadshow. So investors, like what I was at the time, go and meet with all of these sort of founding teams and the management teams. And what I think kind of hit me like a brick was that these weren't kind of what you think when you see things like the film of Social Network, or you hear about Steve Jobs and things like that. They don't seem like something you can relate to potentially, or at least certainly I didn't feel that way. I always thought that founders were this kind of special breed of people that lived in a basement of their parents, super geniuses creating something from nothing. But actually what I found with these founding teams was that they were very relatable. They were just people that found a problem and decided, rather than just go, oh, that's annoying, they decided, I'm going to do something about this. And because that had clocked on, I then also had a bit of a sort of intervention with my family where they kind of said, like, you just don't seem yourself. You seem a bit of a shell of the person that you were, and that kind of really hit deep at that time. So I actually just did something I would certainly not advise, by the way, guys, is I literally quit the next day. And I had a notice period to see out when I started trying to think about, okay, what do I do next? I want to start something of my own. I don't just want to be a cog in another big company or something. So got my thinking cap on and came up with my first business, which was also my first failed business. It was a company called Double Tap, which was in essence, a way for bars and restaurants and brands to get their customers to market for them by posting about them on social media. They'd get rewards. So you'd go into a bar, you'd post the story, you'd tag them. If you got a certain number of views, you'd get one shot, maybe a round of shots, that kind of thing, basically. And that was going okay actually, to be honest. And I'm sure we'll probably dig into it in a little bit more detail. But then COVID happened. I'd sort of raised a small friends and family round. We were just starting to get customers, some revenue, some traction. COVID comes around. Dealing with bars and restaurants wasn't the best line of business to be in at the time, as you can imagine. And so it kind of brought a close to that. And I was a little bit lost then, as you can imagine, because as Lakeisha was saying, you know, you take this risk and it's quite embarrassing because you put yourself out there. I'm doing this whole business. You have to shout about it. So when that kind of comes to a close, you're almost embarrassed, right? And that was quite a tough time. So I sort of invested the rest of my time into going into volunteering, and it was through volunteering that I now had the idea for what is now Volunteero.
Volunteero. Man, super cool. And I think as I've got a whole script of questions, and I've wrote down 3 more just from the origin story. And I think the first thing that speaks to me is the founder's path. It is different for everybody. Some people perhaps finish university and they straight in, and maybe they're the super genius in the basement, but there is no defined path. And I think that's something that I'm keen to get across in what we're doing with the community. In terms of that path, there's a lot to break down there, actually, isn't there? You know, there's that first part of where you've made that decision, and I'm going to go into it. There's the first business. That's not panned out quite as you wanted it, and then there's the path into Volunteero. We will, the meat of this conversation will be Volunteero, but I think there's a lot to be had from that early stage, from that, how do you make that shift? And in terms of that, I guess that first tipping point to start the first business, to start Double Tap, you know, was there a tipping point in your mind where you've gone, okay, I'm doing this, I'm speaking to friends and family, I'm raising some initial funds? Like, was there a tipping point that you could put your finger on?
I mean, to be honest, I'm quite lucky because I don't consider myself to be sort of brave in the sense that I was like, right, I want to do this, whatever it is. I kind of felt like my options had expired. You know, I'd pursued this career in banking. I'd got to kind of, you know, it, like I said, taken a lot from me, and I knew I didn't want to continue down that path, but I kind of had this, you know, I felt quite liberated in the sense that, well, I mean, either I go join another career path, which I can do at any time. I can jump back into the old career path, which again, I can do at any time, but when else would I be blessed to have this time in front of me that's completely free, where I can do whatever it is that I want, you know? And I think the irony is we've all got that in front of us. We just don't think we do, right? We think that we're tied down through various means, whether that be because we've got a mortgage or we need to pay the bills or whatever it might be, but you're kind of not. You can change tact at any time. So there wasn't really necessarily a tipping point. I think it was just a lot of things that happened that coalesced at a certain period in my life that gave me that freedom to just kind of swing for the fences, I guess, you know?
Yeah, amazing. And in terms of that, that first shift in mentality, you've worked in big business, high stress, like there's a lot of competition in the industry you're in, and then you've took that first step. What did that look like? Was there like a real contrast in terms of the environments and the mentality? Was there some things that you took with you? What was that first day in the new office like, almost?
It's a really, really good question. I'm trying to think back to what that actually looked like. I think there's a lot of things that you'll take from the previous career that you had, right? And whether that be connections, networks, skills that you picked up along the way and stuff. But what that kind of transition looked like, first and foremost, was how lonely it became. So I'm sure we'll talk about advice. I've actually got different tips for at the end. So this is one of them that I'll throw in, is please just pick a co-founder. Don't try and do it on your own. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. So I think the first thing is lonely, because you've just now extracted yourself from an industry where you had all these friends and connections, and you're suddenly completely unrelatable as well. So suddenly you'll find that there's a disconnect between even you and your friends because you're doing something completely novel to them, and you're not in that world where let's just go and sort of bitch and moan about co-workers and things like that. You haven't got all of that to relate to anymore, so you kind of find yourself not only lonely sort of physically in what you're doing, but just generally speaking, you've isolated yourself. So I tried to dive myself headfirst into kind of networking, finding out who in my network. Turns out there's a guy who I went to school with, started a business, go, talk to him, go to events, things like that. I think one of the other things that just popped to mind when you said it was at banking, there was a lot of sort of, and I'm sure this is the same in many industries, there's a lot of sort of FaceTime, right? It's be in first, be out last, and sort of stare at a screen, sometimes pointlessly, and that's the reality. When you're working for yourself on your own business, I still sort of did some of the same things. Like I felt like I should just be sat staring at a blank computer screen at like 8 p.m. on a Friday. And that took me a long time to kick out of that because it was so kind of deep rooted that it was like, it's time in equals value out. But actually that's just not the case when you work for yourself. And it's taken me a long time, probably 8 years up until this point now, since I started the entrepreneurial journey, so to speak. And I'm still probably not quite there yet, but it's just not about that anymore, you know what I mean? If you can have an hour where you're absolutely killer and you crush it versus 12 hours sort of, meandering around, pottering about, you know which one's much more valuable? Well, it's the hour. So that was one of the biggest things that it took for me is the loneliness and this kind of just, 9 to 5 mentality, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I remember starting my business 15 years ago. I worked in tech, I had lots of connections, network, and I started on the first day, I thought, I know loads of people. I've got loads of customers, and then nothing came from it. And then I think it was a bit similar to yourself. There was this dawning point where I was really realised, like, I'm on my own here. Like, how am I going to get the customers? How do we do it? So it's really interesting to hear you say that, and you've just given me a little bit of a flashback. It's coming out. It's coming out.
Not a good one. It
no. Well, no. It's useful to talk about because I think it may be that we're unique in what we're saying here, but it may be that actually all founders feel that to some extent, and to hear it out loud is probably helpful for the founders out there and the future founders. The other thing, I've saved it for the end, man, but I love a productivity hack. So when you're talking about that hour of being absolutely in the zone, we can come back to that, but I love a productivity hack. In terms of that then, like, awesome, you've hit that wall in a career. And again, like many people, some people have very well thought out careers. Sometimes you end up in a career, you don't know, but you've had that point, you've hit the wall. Friends and family say, what the hell are you doing, Ash? Okay, you're off. Your first business, Double Tap. It would be quite cool to I think, dig into that. And if you don't mind, actually, maybe if we could just start with a quick recap on what Double Tap was, where that idea perhaps came from, and perhaps what the early days looked like.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly how it dawned on me, but I think it was that I hate being sold to in any capacity, which is ironic now because I do a lot of selling in my day-to-day role. But I hate it. So I kind of started thinking, well, why do I buy what I buy, do what I do, go to where I go to? And it kind of always dawned on me, it was always through friends, right? It's somewhere that somebody's told me about, or a friend that's wearing a cool pair of trainers or something like that. And I started wondering why there wasn't a way to kind of facilitate more of this and allow brands to facilitate it at scale, And that was when I started thinking, oh, well, maybe if somebody rewarded me with a discount code at Nike, if I posted a picture of my Nikes, maybe I'd do that, And that was what got me thinking about the idea. So, yeah, essentially Double Tap is, as a brief recap, is a way that, to start with, it was a way that bars and restaurants could reward their customers if they went and posted about them while they're in there. So, a story, a video, a picture of their food or whatever it might be, posted, tagged. Our app would then show you what rewards are available, at which tiers of likes and all that kind of stuff, and it would track all of that engagement automatically, and you go ding, 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 you've got a 20% off next time, or a free round of shots, or a free croissant or something like that, right? The aim was obviously going to be to then push into more like digital brands and things, and direct-to-consumer brands as well. So that was where the idea came from. How it all actually then happened was, well, once I had the idea, I didn't go through any of the traditional write a business plan or anything like that, and personally I wouldn't really recommend it ever anyway, to be honest with you. I think it can be a good way to bring your thoughts and ideas into one place, but otherwise it could be a bit of a waste of time. So I kind of just actually did everything you shouldn't have done. I didn't actually go and talk to a single potential customer. I didn't speak to anybody. I was just like, this is a great idea. Definitely. And I just went, okay, let's invest a good chunk of my own savings into offshore development team to start building a product. Okay, so this is obviously, hopefully you'll realise this is first big no-no, right? Okay, I haven't spoken to a single customer, but building a product. And I went and did that, and then I literally was sort of waiting around for that to happen, and then starting to put together a little sales deck and starting to get ready to go and talk to people, and then I picked a location which was Sheffield, where I went to university, and I went, you know what, like, I know enough people still there, I know the area, I'm going to kind of go and root myself there at least a couple of days a week, and I'm going to go pound the pavements, and I'm going to start getting bars and restaurants ready for when this thing goes live. And yeah, and we did. We got a product that worked, and it worked pretty well, and we then got, 50 or so of the bars and restaurants. I say we, it's very much the royal we, it was still just me at this stage, but always say we, it sounds cooler. And so pound the pavements, got 50 odd bars or restaurants, and then started doing all the freshers fairs, getting all the merch, kind of, getting some of the uni boys that I still knew to come and work these things with me. We got users, and it started to work, and stuff was happening, and that was an incredibly cool feeling at the time. I don't know where all of you guys might be in any of your potential journeys, but the first time somebody downloads your app who you've never met, it's one of the coolest feelings you'll ever have, And so that was all kind of seemingly going well, right? And yeah, then sorry, there was a slight bit that I missed out. I did also raise, because my sort of 50 grand only took me so far with this product development. Everything always takes longer and is more expensive in tech than you ever think it's going to be. And so I did raise a sort of friends and family round, from genuine sort of friends and family, quite frankly, at that point. And anyway, so fast forward on, we're about 6 months after we've launched and everything, and it's going okay. People are starting to pay us as well, these bars and restaurants. And that was when COVID came about. And it was at a time when I kind of had to go raise actually a more decent sum of money to kind of do anything meaningful with this, but I didn't really know what the plans were, to be honest with you. I was sort of freestyling it. And the honest truth was, COVID ended up being the exit clause that I needed. Start to finish by this point, it had been about 2.5 years of sort of working on my own in my bedroom sort of thing. And there were so many signs, like the writing was on the wall. I knew this thing actually wasn't going to work, and I can tell you many of the reasons as to why. But I didn't want to see it. Like, you get blinded and you're just kind of like, you just desperately want to plow on. And as somebody who's a founder, you probably are quite resilient, which is a big plus, but it's also a bit of a negative sometimes, because you will keep walking forward, without kind of being receptive to some of the signals around. So anyway, when COVID came around, it kind of, in a way, it was a relief, because it was like, well, this wasn't my fault, this was COVID, you know what I mean? But actually, I think it would have come to a close not too long after that anyway, to be quite frank.
Mate, I really appreciate the honesty as well, because it's tough, isn't it? It's your baby, it's your passion. You've put 2 years of your life into it, and we'll come on to it as some of the Volunteero stuff as well. Sometimes it is making the hard decisions. And it's not always obvious, and sometimes you know what you've got to do, and it's hard to still do it. I guess there was a couple of real follow-ups that, again, I think may be helpful for people in terms of that time there with Double Tap. And I think those two things that I'd love to just get your take on were, in terms of that feedback loop when you're building a product with customers. You've took your money, you've got a great idea, you've gone out and you've made something amazing. Did you fix that feedback loop as you went on? Did you get to the point where you were iterating and taking, customers' feedback to shape the product, or did you, what did that look like basically?
Yes, yeah. In honesty, I did. But the problem is there's only so much you can iterate on a fundamentally flawed concept, and I don't think I realised that at the time. So yeah, absolutely. I kind of then quickly learned one of the key challenges is not having in-house development. Your iteration speed is very, very slow, because essentially these agencies have got periods of time booked out for customers. Oh, you didn't fit that time, you have to wait for the next 3 months, and do you even have the money for it, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really difficult if you don't have, some of that development resource in-house. So there's only really so quickly you could iterate. What I could do is I could iterate on things that were not the product itself necessarily. How could I get a bar to start acquiring, getting more of their customers to go and, bring it forward. And so, I would literally go in and train every one of their staff, on an evening, and then I'd even give them, referral codes, and I would say, I'm going to keep a leaderboard of all of the staff members across all the bars. The more downloads you get, I'll put a, reward or a present or something at the end of a month, changing the collateral, doing different events, literally standing out flyering. So I did certainly get a chance to learn and iterate more on a go-to-market basis. I never really got the opportunity with Double Tap to iterate on a product basis because it was just too slow. I kind of had to sit on my hands a lot of the time, which is very frustrating, as you can imagine. So that was certainly a challenge. But I think one of the reflections, it's going to sound so ironic because I didn't exactly learn from my mistake with Volunteero. I kind of got lucky with this one, but I am in a position, I feel, to say this with quite a lot of credibility, is that, knowing the problem you're solving and understanding that industry and the customer so incredibly intimately, you would never, hopefully, never really find yourself iterating on a product that shouldn't even exist. And that is the problem. The honest truth is most startups fail because they're solving a problem that's not big enough, they're solving a problem that doesn't exist, or they're just sort of solving it maybe incorrectly, but at least that last one you can potentially solve. So the honest truth is, when I think back to Double Tap, I think if I'd have gone into some of these bars and restaurants, maybe even if I did 15, 20 of them, I don't think I'd have ever built Double Tap, because I'd have found out a number of key things that I learnt throughout the process. This wasn't a big enough thing for them, right? I could never track the revenue I brought back into the restaurant. That's all they really care about, right? And if I can't track that, I can't prove an ROI. I can just tell them they got this many eyeballs on a picture of their brunch or something like that. It was never going to be enough for them to warrant a decent amount of spend. They were never going to allocate enough budget to warrant what I was going to have to do go-to-market wise. So all of these things would have kind of come up, and they would say things like, oh, well, what if we don't like the picture that they've posted? Well, again, I can't really tackle that problem for you guys and make a nice looking meal, but these are all things I would have realised, and I think the most obvious thing that would have come through for me from those conversations is like, this actually isn't that big a problem. Like this product would be like a little gimmick as far as they're concerned, and if it didn't go gangbusters, they'd ship you off, after a couple of months, right? And so I kind of really wanted to make sure if I ever were to build yet another business in the future, I honestly think I would just spend hours and hours and hours dedicating myself to speaking with the customers and the users in my potential industry with absolutely no direction whatsoever, because the minute you go in with direction and an idea in your head, you're just going to steer them to the answers that you want, and that's really not the way to go. I don't know if anyone's read The Mum's Test, but it's a book that I would highly recommend, which is essentially, don't ask your mum about your idea because she's going to tell you it's amazing, right? And that's just the honest truth. So yeah, that was my probably main thing I learned from that, is just spend time with customers before you start building anything.
Mate, you might have just saved someone 2 years.
No, I really hope so,
maybe they're skipping. So. Maybe they're skipping to the second startup, which is where we're going now. So we've hit COVID. It's given you a bit of a get out, which you're quite happy about, in all honesty. And there's obviously been the birth of a new idea at some point. So what was your life like at that point in time? What led to Volunteero?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say first things first is, and we talked about this on the call actually, Dave, is at a certain point I feel like there's a switch goes off in your head where you stop seeing things as just a problem, but you see them as a problem to be solved. And maybe some of you are at that stage, you know. Clue if you're at that stage, if you've got a notepad in your phone that says something about silly, crazy ideas or something like that, that's kind of where I found myself. And I was no longer just looking at problems, I was hopefully looking at problems and potential solutions. Anyway, so I kind of, this is where I claw my way back from my banking days, okay? So I was wanting to kind of do something that, one, made me feel a bit better, got me a bit busy and feel better about myself as well. So volunteering seemed like a good idea. I had volunteered in the past, but there was a particular role that kind of resonated with me. So obviously people were talking about people being isolated during COVID, and it sounded horrible, you know, these potential old people who are sat in their home and not spoken to anyone in weeks. It seems devastating. So there was a role which is called a befriender, where you get matched up with an older person, you either meet them or you speak to them on a weekly basis. And I was like, okay, that's cool, you know, I'm a nice enough guy, I'm sure I could just speak to somebody once a week, that'd be easy enough, wouldn't it? So I went to my local Age UK's website, I signed up, I heard nothing for weeks, even though they were saying how much they were clamouring for volunteers. It was just a black box and I didn't know what was going on. Eventually I heard something back, and that started, that started a sort of 3-month style onboarding process at that point. It was wild, and there were massive breaks between. It was all email based, it was me having to chase them up. I then had to go in person to an office to sit and watch a presentation I could have just done online. Then the craziest thing that really I thought was bananas is then to get matched up with somebody, I had to come back down into the office. They gave us all printouts of this spreadsheet, which had literally the names and contact details and a little bio of all of these isolated older people. That is a scammer's wet dream, I think, right there, if that had kind of leaked into the wrong hands. So I was just like, every part of this process was kind of mind-boggling. And the final piece was then when I was matched up, I was meant to write out a Word document and email it after every one of my meetings with them. And so, you know, hopefully for all of you, you're sat there thinking this is pretty nuts, right? You know, I'd wanted to help out. I'm not sure if I want to help out that much. So anyway, it seemed quite obvious in my mind through this process, a platform was kind of coming to fruition, and I was starting to put it together. And so then I did do one thing, which was learning from my previous mistakes. I did then start picking up the phone to, you know, picking up the phone to sort of CEOs of local charities, bigger charities, and just sort of talking through their problems in terms of managing volunteers. And that gave me some of the confidence to go, cool, all right, there's something into this. And I asked my charity that I was volunteering for, I said, look, if I build this thing that I've talked about here, would you guys just use it, right? And it really started out just me trying to solve my own problems. I don't think I had any big aspirations of building a business. Quite frankly, I had a little scar tissue I think that I had to get over at that stage. So I wasn't thinking with big ambitions in mind. I just wanted to build something cool that I could use, and that might be it. And I'll go back into banking or something like that. Who knows?
Go back into banking. That's
geez,
done now, man.
I know,
We've put a stake through banking.
I know, yeah.
Turns
I didn't know anything else. I didn't have any skills.
Mate, mate, said like every founder, you do everything and make it happen. The first thing I'm going to say, we all knew Ash was a nice guy as soon as we seen him, didn't we? He's going out and looking after old people. It's instant.
They're still seeing the banker. I can tell, you know?
The banker's gone, man. The banker's gone. I think in terms of that, the first thing that I'd just love to talk about is, and in both instances, you've talked about a little bit doing the hard yards. Yeah, you know, you built Double Tap, you're out on the street, you're going in people's front doors, you're getting your first customers. You learn in terms of building the product, but you also didn't shy away from doing the hard yards in picking up the phone, potentially cold calling people and finding out where you're at with things. So I guess my question there is, when you're a founder, like, is that, in your opinion, a key attribute? Do you think it's essential? Do you think you can build a product perhaps without doing the hard yards? Do you need to find a co-founder that perhaps has got a bit of that in them? Or, what's your take on that part of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, look, I do. It's not for everybody, right? I think we'll probably talk about the co-founder relationship later, but, I'm fortunate in that I had an amazing software engineer, right? And the last thing I wanted to do was waste any of his time when he could be building products. So I felt at the early days, everything else was under my remit, right? But yeah, no, I think it's certainly, if you're on the commercial side, I think you need to get involved in everything. I think those first sales need to be you. Those first cold calls need to be you. And nobody likes it. I don't think there's many people in the world that like picking up the phone to someone they don't even know who doesn't want to talk to them. If you do, you're crazy. You really are crazy. But yeah, I think it's very important that those things are you. And it's not just because I think there's a number of different reasons. One, it is a learning perspective, right? How can you ever expect somebody to come in and do a role that you don't even understand? Do you even know what you're selling yet? So until you've kind of gone through some of those early sales motions and sales calls and demos and stuff, it's quite hard to then know who's the right person to come in and do the first sales after you. Same as like customer success, So I did the first 10 sales, the first 10 implementations, all of the kind of operations side that came with that as well, right? And I think most commercial founders should do the same, because when I implemented customers, wow, I learned about what we're missing, what should be next on the product, right? And I think if you kind of want to sit in your ivory tower as quickly as possible, your business is going to suffer as a result, quite frankly. So the longer you can stay quite deep-rooted within your business, the better. And obviously I imagine there's some point where you kind of start to step further and further away because your time is more valuable doing other things. But I personally still have not quite got to that level, not even close. So yeah, I think it's important. I also think it's important because it's just important toughening up, quite frankly, right? Like, and having people come in, if the first salesperson you get in is having a tough time, well, if you've also sort of had a bit of that tough time, it's much easier to relate. It's easier for them to relate to you. All of my team know that I've been in the trenches, and I still am in the trenches, so to speak, and I think that resonates with them, right? And so yeah, I think it's very important where you can to kind of get involved in everything in the early days.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. A couple of bits I'll loop back on, and it would be interesting to go in a bit deeper about the customer success piece, and also about perhaps the importance of sales within your business. But before we get to that, you've had that idea this time round. You've learned a lot from Double Tap. You're convinced. You've seen it. You've seen the problem. You're there. You then talked about having a software engineer, and I presume this is your co-founder that you're talking about. So it'd be really interesting if you could perhaps share with us what that looked like. The early days, did you find one co-founder? I think it was two co-founders, wasn't it? So what did that look like?
Yeah, so we had two co-founders. I had two co-founders originally, and the fact I say originally, I'm sure there's a story there which we'll probably get onto shortly. But yeah, so finding a co-founder is one, especially if you're a commercial type person without technical experience, finding this mystical sort of unicorn-esque developer who's willing to take this major risk with you is like one of the biggest conversation topics in any room that I tend to be in with founders. And I've not got really much advice to be able to impart to you. What I can say is, so my two co-founders are both software engineers. So we ended up having myself, everything commercial, and then two people focused on the software side of things. Worked really well for us, especially in the early days, because you just want the product to move as quickly as possible, right? And you haven't really got that much to sell, so there's no point going too far and wide with the sales, quite frankly, at that stage. So, but I had actually met my former co-founder, Luca, and I met him. I met a guy at an event just like this, and we were chatting away, and I told him about my business Double Tap at the time, and I said I'm looking for CTO, a technical co-founder, and he said, well, maybe you should talk to a friend of mine in Switzerland. And so he connected me with him. Me and Luca then became kind of friends over Skype. Skype back then, this was quite some time ago, as you can tell. But yeah, so we kind of connected. It turned out that he wasn't that interested in that line of business, what we were doing at the time. Maybe he saw what I couldn't. But we became quite close and we stayed in touch regularly. So anyway, long story short is when I then came with the idea for Volunteero, guess who I go and speak to at that point, right? It's Luca. And it's about as serendipitous a situation as you can imagine, because when I told Luca, I do this befriending volunteering, I'm seeing this older person every week, and he goes, dude, I do the same here in Switzerland, and it's a nightmare, isn't it? So he was facing the same challenges, he totally resonated with it, and he was like, dude, I'm 100% in. And also what's more is I've got the best software engineer I've ever met from university, and let me chat to him because maybe we need some extra expertise to be able to bring this thing to market. So that was how our kind of co-founder relationship came together. We slapped an email down saying we all own a third of this thing that we're just about to incorporate, and that was literally it. And we kind of went from that point onwards and didn't really look back after that.
Amazing, amazing. It feels a little bit at that stage that it is a bit of a leap of faith at that point in time. You know, it's recommendations or you've built a bit of a relationship over Skype, but I guess your opinion on that is just get started. Is that your mindset, or do you think so maybe actually we bring it up to date and then we can reflect on it. So what did that co-founding journey look like after that period?
So whilst it was like this fun side project, everything was golden. Because as you can probably gather from the small story I've just said there, is we didn't have any kind of deep discussion about what we want from life and what we want this thing to be. And in a way that's a good thing, because we didn't waste any time. We just got building something, got it out into market, and there's something to be said for that. But when we started to then get to a point where we actually then had like revenue, some meaningful revenue at that time, you know, users, customers, etc. We were kind of, as far as we could tell, we were looking around and we were talking to other startup founders and we were ahead of them, and we were just sort of felt like we were just messing about weekends and evenings and stuff, and we said, okay, cool, we're onto something here, and we're getting some real positive feedback. So our kind of ambitions changed at that point, and our vision changed for this. We had much bigger aspirations, and we kind of went, well, we need to go full time onto this. We need to have the money to allow you both to come full time. Let's go and raise some money. And so I went out to kind of raise investments. I raised about £500,000 from angels and some early stage institutional money. And then we went full time. And then things started to kind of deteriorate, I think. What it became quite apparent was that we had different ideas of what the work life was going to look like. Myself, and who is my other co-founder and current co-founder, a guy called Kadar, the one who Luca introduced me to, we wanted to go all in. We wanted to commit everything. We knew this was going to be high stress, high pace, you know, a short lifetime's worth of commitment here, and we wanted to go big, right? And I don't think Luca felt that way. And Luca maybe worked in a slightly different way than us. He could only work when he was really feeling it, maybe, and we realized, well, sometimes you're just not feeling it and we have to get up and get cracking. And so that it started to fracture a little bit. And eventually, you know, I had to have the kind of hard conversations, which is, it feels like we're doing more here, you're doing less. Shall we have a conversation about what life looks like with this and where we want it to go? And, you know, things that were coming out of Luca's side were, you know, entrepreneurial stuff gives you flexibility and all that kind of stuff. And although that might be true in some regards, it's not really true, right? Yes, you can take half a day off if you need to because you've not got a boss, but you almost never do because you've not got a boss, right? So essentially it materialized that I had to sort of have a hard conversation, and I just had to say, look, it feels like we're going in different paths, you know, I think you need to make a decision. either you're as committed as us, or it's not going to work and it's going to become really, really strained in the long run. And he kind of came back after a period of time and said that he was essentially out. And that was tough, man. Yeah, that was like a really, really tough period of time, because as you can imagine, I'd built a really, really close relationship with Luca over this time. I had these dreams and visions of, we started as these 3 guys in our bedrooms and we're going to take it to this giant business, and it's still going to be the 3 of us and it's going to be amazing. And so kind of having that future feeling like it was ripped apart, and I'm sure the same for Luca. Yeah, we've kind of not really spoken since, which I'm pretty gutted about. But I think, you know, I learned then that sometimes you have to do the hard things that's the right thing for others, right? So sometimes you have to hurt, in a way, be cruel to be kind to the many, right, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how we are now, just the 2 co-founders.
And I think also it's the speed of decision making. You've acknowledged it, and again, you perhaps have learnt from Double Tap, and you've acknowledged that we're in different places with this, and you could have perhaps let it rumble for 12 months, 24 months, who knows, and then it becomes a bigger problem.
I did let it rumble for too long, to be quite frank, but you always will, guys. Like, every investor and advisor you'll ever have says, no, you need to bite the bullet and have this conversation, but we're still human beings, right? And we kind of hope that it will just figure itself out, and it didn't, sadly.
Okay, mate, perfect. And I suspect there will be some people watching online, and maybe even people in this room thinking about finding a co-founder. But I feel like the takeaway for you is that getting a co-founder projected the business forward.
Yeah.
And although there's a risk involved in that, and you've got 90% of the way there and had a little bit of pain, it far outweighs it. You know, if you're a non-technical person, you would be like, my advice is find that person to be your co-founder, and vice versa would be.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You know, I would never go and do a business solo anymore. You know, the idea of having 100% of something that kind of made me semi-miserable to make it is far less appealing than having 50% of something that, you know, I had somebody to bounce ideas off of. You dovetail. When you're down, they're up. They're good at some things, you're good at some things. So I certainly would always go in with a co-founder, and obviously the natural question is sort of like what that co-founder looks like. How do you find them? And look, I'm talking from my perspective as a commercial co-founder, so I don't know what the other side looks like. But if you're a technical person, you'll have plenty of offers, so you guys don't need to worry too much. From the kind of commercial side, you need a technical co-founder. The one thing I would just say is, firstly, just get out there, because you never know what that meeting is that's going to lead to that serendipitous, you know, outcome that happens. And unfortunately, that's just a hell of a lot of legwork, right? Going to hackathons, where do they reside? Guess what? They don't typically, I'm saying them as if they're some sort of species of creature. No, but it's often their interests are different to a commercial person's interest, right? They hang out at sort of maybe more hackathon type events than like an investor pitch day or something. That's typically what I found. So make sure you find yourself in the right rooms to meet the right people that you're essentially looking for and speak to everybody. But one of the questions you actually had, and it did get me thinking, is like, what does the right co-founder look like? And I think taking everything I've learned, the most important things are some of those kind of value-orientated things. The rest can figure itself out, right? Is your idea of hard working the same as theirs? Pretty important, because that's going to become a bit of a bugbear if not. You know, what does kindness and things like that look like to you, right? These kind of things are going to become important, because in a way you're going to end up raising essentially a family together, right? And everyone always says with your partners you need your values to align. Well, I think with your co-founder you need your values to align, because, you know, when you're hiring people, well, what does your benefits policy look like? How are you going to treat that first problem that comes up? And I think it's very, very important that those things align. But as far as kind of skills are concerned, I think you can make anything work, but if possible, obviously have some semi-opposing skills, because there's no point having two of you who are really, really good at the same things. You don't get a huge amount of benefit. But I would just say the value side of things is the ultimate most important aspect. The rest you can kind of make work in the future.
Yeah, man, it's good. It's really, really good stuff. I guess just super quickly, you've called out you're the commercial co-founder. In terms of the importance of that piece, like I speak to a lot of technical people, and a lot of technical early stage founders, and I think they quite often think you build a product, it sells itself. My product's going to be that good, yeah. And I think actually when you speak to more experienced founders, they start to put a bit of value on the sales and the go-to-market and that type of strategy. So again, it would be quite interesting. I know you're the commercial hat at this point, but getting your take on the importance of sales and go-to-market when you've built a product. You know, you've built this amazing platform that's going to be fantastic for all these charities, but how do you make sure people know it's there? So, you know, what's your view on the importance of sales?
I mean, I think you're kind of seeing a trend in the space anyway, that the sales are suddenly the, you know, Ronaldos of this world these days in the startup space, you know, and I think it makes sense, to be honest with you, because, you know, a good sales leader takes a decent company to be an amazing company, quite frankly. So the sales is incredibly important, and what I would actually say is, you know, having an idea and thinking about what sales looks like, even when you're starting to think about the idea, is quite important. Because I'll revert back to kind of Double Tap as an example. One of the fundamental problems is the unit economics were never going to work. And the problem is unit economics is an extremely boring thing to say, especially in the early days when you've got this cool idea about something that's going to be great. But the fact of the matter is you need to be able to sell it for less than it costs you, whatever that might look, right? And so anyway, one thing just to focus in on is like, is that ever going to be possible in a business that you're building? One thing that I always keep at the forefront of my mind, especially when I'm talking to other kind of friends who are starting businesses as well. But in terms of kind of that sales side of things, it's so incredibly important. But I mean, you know, I'm not a sales expert, so there's only limited amounts that I can do. But I think the one thing I learned most importantly about sales is, I think most people have this vision of sales, which is this like super slick, charismatic individual who can just go in and just sell ice to the Eskimos, right? But that's just so not the case at the end of the day. The best salespeople are just simply problem solvers in their own way, and they're just listeners, right? The best salespeople ask more questions than they ever, you know, they spend more time asking questions than they do actually talking, okay? And I think that's something that took me quite a long time to realize, because, you know, if you know that as well, be that person as a founder, just ask questions. You don't even have to try and tell people about what your kind of product is in the early days, but, you know, if you just spend time forming a relationship, understanding who they are, what they struggle with, not only is it going to help, you know, your business as it grows and develops in time, but also that makes you a much better salesperson, because, oh, well, our product does this, which solves that challenge that you're talking about. So I think that was just the fundamental mind shift that I had about sales, that it's not this super slick talker, it's actually just often much more of a introverted listener, potentially.
Mate, for sure. Love a good discovery call. That's what it's all about, man. That's what it's all about.
Actually, it reminds me, so the guy who came in to do, so the first hire I ever made, right, was this guy who I went to uni with. We played sports together. And I always, well, I say he's the best sale I ever made for Volunteero. And so I had no idea really what I was doing with sales. I was sort of freestyling it, trying to learn everything I could. And I knew that he was starting to pay interest in what Volunteero were doing, but I knew I could never pay his salary and the things like that. So how could I possibly get this guy on board? So I invited him in, and I just said, dude, like I've got a demo call coming up with a big charity. Could you just come in, help me prep for it, listen to me, tell me what I did right, did wrong, for example. And I remember like I thought what a discovery call was literally me sort of saying like, okay, so how many volunteers have you got? Okay, cool. How many staff you got? Okay, cool. Now, shall I give you a demo? It isn't. Literally, he was behind on a whiteboard and he was writing questions and he was like hammering the question. And I swear we had an hour-long call and 45 minutes of it were him writing questions that I then had to ask and ask and ask and ask. And so that was an eye-opening moment for me, but it also gave him the bug, so he ended up taking a massive salary cut and coming to work for us. So that was a good result.
Win-win. Mate, I had so many more questions, as you say, growth milestones, talking about your business moat, and we've touched a little bit, but the thing that I've just got at the very bottom is I would love if you could perhaps leave with a little bit of advice.
See, this one was the only one where I did make notes. Not really notes, but I just wanted to. The problem is I come up with a different one every time, and I feel like I actually think this one through. So I've got 3. So the first one is I would personally suggest, you don't have to, and I know founders that haven't done this, but do something that you're passionate about. So there are so many times over the course of this 5 years where I wouldn't have carried on, to be quite frank, if I wasn't so passionate about it. It felt like it wasn't really going, and yet I would continue to slog it out, and something then happens 3 months later and I'm all back in again, right? So if you want to be able to make it through those ups and downs, I think you really need to have that thing that you're passionate about. And also the commitment to, I believe this is genuinely a thing, right? Because the amount of, you're going to lose confidence so regularly, and the confidence really only comes from that kind of, utter belief in what you're doing, I think. The second one was, actually I've said this one loads, so know your space intimately, right? I really, really cannot stress that hard enough. Everybody wants to go and build something, but just start out with the building blocks right. I promise you'll save yourself a lot of heartache. And then the final one for me has always been sort of run your own race. So I think we all can get lost on LinkedIn these days, and somebody's doing better than you. And certainly as when, if you are a founder or when you become a founder, someone's going to have raised a load of money and someone's got this crazy growth chart, and you're always going to feel insufficient, I think. And it's going to make you constantly change, like, oh, well, should I do that? Should I change tack? Things like that. So I think you've got to kind of try and find a way to get yourself comfortable doing what you think is right, trusting your own gut, your instinct, and running the race that essentially you need to. And I remember, it takes me back to a time when I was really struggling with this particular thing. And just as that was happening, I have a sort of friend, quote unquote friend, shall we say, who was starting another business. He's failed 3 businesses, but he's got some crazy network. And he had this big, crazy idea for a business. And he went out and raised something like $5 million straight off the bat. He was sending me videos on some investor's yacht and stuff. And there was me having just closed $500,000, suddenly feeling a little bit like, well, I thought I'd smashed it, Look, they burnt through that in under a year, and they had nothing to show for it, right? So at that time, I felt utterly puny, and I'm not saying like, oh, egg on their face or anything like that, but now I wouldn't have even given it. I'd have been like, good for you, man. I really, really hope the best for you, but that's not me, and that's not my business. So, try to kind of bring that mindset when you can, because I promise you, whatever you're doing, you're smashing it. And that's all you need to know, and just do what's right for you.
Boom. That's a mic drop, man. Round of applause. Yes. Love it. Man, we've got a community starting, haven't we? I like this.
Definitely,
I like
man.
this. So, thank you, Ash.
Pleasure.
That was brilliant.
Hope it was helpful.
Genuinely, we could have sat here for another hour. I'm 100%
Definitely.
sure of it. And I feel like maybe there'll be a repeat visit at some point later in the
Count
year.
me in, man.
Next year,
Count me in.
So.
And then I come back to an empty room and I feel like I didn't do quite as good a job.